We all speak languages. It's a crime all of us but feral children raised by woodland animals commit. Languages shape the way we understand the world and give us the powerful ability to further empathize with each other and to transfer information. If you are watching this video, you speak English. English is the lens under which you perceive reality. That is why it is so important to understand where it came from, how it evolved, and where it will go next. A year and a half ago, on my 13th birthday, my brain decided to focus on a new thing. In the past, it had been cars, trains, birds, and Star Wars. This time, it was languages. Since then, I have learned several languages' grammatical structures, and even learned how to speak some of them to a relatively high level, considering the time constraints. Not only have I learned to love other mysterious languages of foreign lands, but also dead ones, and for better or worse, my own. But English, or let alone any language, never could have existed without the Big Bang. The Big Bang occurred when an infinitely dense point in space suddenly exploded 13.8 billion years ago. Since this explosion, the universe has been expanding at the speed of light. In this grand new, energy-filled universe, matter was slowly drawn together in separate pockets by gravity. These clouds of gas and dust got denser and denser until a star is born. And another. And how about a couple more? Soon, the universe is a complex system of burning balls of nuclear explosions exerting their gravitational forces on each other, soon forming galaxies and galaxy clusters. Inside of these massive balls of fire and explosions, new chemical compounds are formed from the immense gravitational forces inside the cores of the stars. Some of these include gold, iron, copper, mercury, lead, and iodine, with many of the elements forged in the bellies of these stars being vital to life. When the biggest stars explode, a supernova occurs, a massive explosion throwing their newly forged dense atoms along with the lighter ones throughout the nearby universe. These supernovas are often the base for new solar systems. The more dense portions of gas and dust end up condensing together to create a new star, whereas the less dense areas form accretion disks of rocks and bigger dust particles forming planets. This is exactly how Earth was created. Once the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, its unique Goldilocks conditions, meaning not too little and not too much of anything, allowed life to evolve on it. However, life wasn't yet able to appear until 3.7 billion years ago, after the Earth finally decided it didn't want to be a massive volcano anymore. The first organisms were all single-celled and fed off of volcanic plumes on the ocean floor. Evolution kept up the next billions of years, with cyanobacteria taking 1.3 billion years to evolve, and worms taking over 1.5 billion years more. 500 million years ago was when things really started speeding up. Reptiles, amphibians, fish, birds, and mammals. After the big rock went boom and killed all the dinosaurs, mammals became the most successful species on the planet, being dominated themselves by humans. Humans have humble beginnings, which they share with many other mammals, having first evolved from rodents into apes. The only thing that differentiates humans from other apes is our ability for collective learning through language. Humans are the only ape known to have created any artwork, typically associated with deeper figurative meaning being assigned to physical objects. Humans are also the only species to be able to ask not just where, what, and when, but also why and how. With a species capable of thinking figuratively, asking deep questions, and communicating with each other, it's no surprise that something great was going to happen to this ragtag group of hunter-gatherers. The agricultural revolution was arguably the most significant force on humans. As people moved into these new towns and cities and out of their small hunter-gatherer tribes, they needed to communicate. For this reason, any language that was impractical to interpersonal communication amongst these settlements ended up being lost to time. It is likely that when the agricultural revolution was taking place about 15,000 years ago, the quantity of languages spoken across the globe reached its peak. Although there were several languages that consisted of no more than 400 words, there were likely more than 10,000 individual languages, with each of them being derived from totally different origins. With the widespread development of towns and cities, it is likely that the total quantity of languages dropped down to 2,000, still nearly triple the modern 750 within a millennia of the agricultural revolution commencing. One of the most successful hunter-gatherer groups were the horse-riding, genociding Indo-Europeans that we all know and love. The Indo-European tribes originated in the Eurasian steppe in modern-day Russia and Ukraine, conquering an area ranging from Scotland to Myanmar, killing all the men they could find and taking all of the women as their wives. For this reason, about 50% of the world's population speaks an Indo-European language, with nearly a third of that number being English. Proto-Indo-European can be traced back to just under 6,000 years ago, with Proto-Germanic, the language that separates our language from language families like Slavic, Balkan, Italic, Indo-Iranian being traceable to 500 BCE, with Germanic likely diverging around 3,000 years ago. An unknown event caused the Germanic peoples during the late 10th century BCE through the early 5th century CE to be forced to migrate out of Central Asia and Eastern Europe into Central, Western, and even Southern Europe. During this time, the Romans had control over all the Mediterranean Sea. The Germanic tribes, especially the Visigoths of modern Spain and southern France, had a surprisingly large part in the fall of the empire. They managed to do this in a clever manner. The German men joined the Roman legions in such large numbers that it was no longer necessary to have native Romans join the military in order to defend their homeland from foreign forces. Once the Germanic people controlled what was essentially the entire military, they threw a revolution and burned down Rome. These are the barbarians you hear so much about in Roman history. However, while all this chaos was occurring down south, England was on a slow and steady decline. Around the collapse of Rome in the early 200s CE, England was populated by a mix of Roman settlers and native Celtic tribes called the Brythonic people. These Brythonic people still inhabit Great Britain in areas like Wales, Scotland, and Cornwall, and their genes are in all of those who are ethnically English. England was left nearly entirely defenseless from foreign threats without a centralized government, and was launched into poverty after the fall of the Romans. Around the years 400 through 550 CE, several people groups inhabiting the North Sea coasts of modern Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark, called the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, conquered England and settled the area, forcing the Romano-Brythonic people to assimilate into the newly formed Anglo-Saxon society and kingdoms. As seen by the names of these people, they became the English we know today. The name evolved with the language, with the Angles first becoming Angles, and then the LE suffix being replaced with the ISH suffix, forming the word English, or England, meaning land of the Angles, or English. The Anglo-Saxons weren't able to fully conquer England until around the year 750. This was just a century before another group of settlers moved in, which would shape the language even further. It is important to note that when the Anglo-Saxons moved into England with the Romano-Brythonic tribes, both their three gender grammatical systems, consisting of masculine, feminine, and neuter, combined. However, the arrival of the Norse in 850, all of English's gender classification system fell apart. The Danish and Norwegians moved into northeastern England and established a kingdom that became known as Danelaw, with its two official languages being Old Norse and Old English. This caused a large influx of words being added to English from Norse that were oftentimes already similar to English's pre-existing Germanic words. These tended to conflict with each other based on gender. It is seen as likely that people simply stopped finding grammatical gender as necessary because of how confusing it became to remember the genders of two nearly identical words. It is likely that masculine and neuter genders collapsed in on each other, making feminine words nearly obsolete. Then, the remaining commonly used feminine words collapsed in on this combination of masculine and neutral words, therefore causing grammatical gender to become obsolete in its entirety. This change also caused several irregularities, such as the existence of strong, weak, substantive, and short verbs. This means that different verbs have different quantities of conjugations and forms based on person, with some having as many as 8 and others as few as 4. The arrival of the Norse also caused English to lose its dative case and to lose verb cases in their entirety. As if the language wasn't already chaotic enough, just 2 centuries later, the Normans invaded England in 1066. With William the Conqueror being denied the English crown, he decided he was fed up with pleading and waiting and instead opted to invade England. From across the Channel, he brought his French-speaking nobles with him. Based on the quantity of French words in the English language and the word conqueror being in William's name, it should be easy for you to tell he won. For this reason, the majority of words in the language now derive from Latin or French. Even though roughly 51% of English words come from French or Latin, the words that are most commonly used in daily life are still from Germanic or Anglo-Saxon origin. Only words used in government, science, and the fancier versions of Germanic words are typically of foreign origin. Words like steak, pork, urine, government, and more come from French. It did have translations of these words, these being ko, pika, anwald, and pes. Now that it's around the year 1400 and we're firmly into Middle English, we have our base vocabulary of French, Germanic, Latin, and Greek origin. From here on out, formal language will stay the same vocabulary-wise, except for one major thing: sound shifts, specifically the Great Vowel Shift. The Great Vowel Shift. Just when you thought English's development was slowing down, all of English's vowels, and many of its consonants, were affected drastically during the speaking revolution, which started in southeast England just before the year 1500. Just the simple phrase, I love you, was said drastically differently. It would have been spelled something along the lines of I-L-O-E-V thorn O-U. Notice anything different? First off, you should notice the existence of a now obsolete letter, thorn. Thorn was used in Old English and occasionally Middle English instead of the modern TH cluster. Around the time of the invention of the printing press, which was invented and manufactured primarily in Central Europe, it became impractical to use English-specific characters on a wide scale. Thorn was originally replaced by the letter Y. Fun fact, this is the reason that an old store may have the name Ye Old. People didn't pronounce it as Ye back then. It was simply a printing efficiency measure. The English alphabet used to contain several other letters, with the Old English alphabet including the letters A, ash, B, C, D, F, E, F, Yod, Ha, I, L, M, N, O, P, R, S, T, U, Win, X, Yud, and lastly, thorn. The next thing you may notice, in correlation with the letter thorn, is the pronoun thou. The disappearance of the word thou is more recent, so we'll touch on that later. Finally, the word luv, or love. During the Great Vowel Shift, every single vowel in the English language, shifted, with the general trend being that short vowels became long ones. A word like boot, for example, used to be pronounced the same as the modern word boat. And boat, like the modern word, pardon my British, boat. Seeing as the majority of American settlers came from England in the beginning, our dialect of English received these characteristics, however, some Northern English and Scottish dialects never fully made this shift. Now, we have reached the year 1700 or so. The Great Vowel Shift has spread to all of Great Britain, except for some parts of rural Scotland, Wales, and Northern England. Again, things were just about to calm down, until the Americans. Or the British, depending on how you look at it. Today, its American accent actually resembles the early modern English accent more than the late English accent. Since its independence, American English has become the most common variety of English to learn and speak. Because of the United States' dominant position on the world stage, American English is simply more valuable to speak than British English. Added to the fact that British English is objectively harder to learn than American English for most international learners. American English slang is also the most widely used. For example, the word thou used to mean you, but solely in the singular, whereas you was reserved for the plural. Americans in the late 1800s and early 1900s were the first to drop the usage of thou in favor of you, with this change catching on in Britain a bit later. While these two dialects of English are among the most spoken, and most definitely the most widely learned, the British Empire's conquests didn't stop with the 13 colonies. They didn't stop until they controlled a quarter of the globe, making them the largest empire in history. Needless to say, Great Britain's influence smothered any other language's abilities to even attempt becoming a lingua franca. Today, less than 5% of all English speakers come from the United Kingdom, let alone England. The majority come from countries like the United States, with around 300 million of them hailing from there, 200 million from India, 100 million from Pakistan, just under 150 million from Nigeria, 62 million from the Philippines, and just under 63 million of the United Kingdom. These dialects of English all have their own standards, which heavily differ, but all should be respected because at the end of the day, we don't have a patent on how far English has come and what it's borrowed from other languages. Let's talk about its future. It is not only probable that English will eventually be overthrown as the world's most spoken language, it's nearly impossible that it won't be. As other languages such as Spanish, Chinese, Portuguese, French, and Hindi gain influence on the world stage, one of these languages would be the most likely to surpass English. Before this happens, it's valuable to take a look at the other languages, such and how they will affect English in its future. Nigeria's population is booming, and over 3/4 of their gargantuan 200 million population already speaks the language. Nigerian English, like most African and Asian dialects of English, drop their THs in favor of Ds, Zs, Ss, Ts, and Fs, with D and F being the most common replacements to the sound in Nigeria. This could not only become a new standard form of speaking in Nigeria, but it also has the potential to spread to areas like the United States and England, where this is not yet natural, like the dropping of thou. Because of the aforementioned personal pronoun thou being dropped from all colloquial use in English, we will likely have to find a new second person plural pronoun. Some of the ones we've already come up with are yins, yous, y'all, you guys, and wow, yows. Even though English will eventually lose its grasp on the world, that won't likely be for a while. The population of English speakers is still going up steadily, and English speakers make up around 60% of all internet traffic. With more people speaking English at home, English is likely to become the most spoken native language in the world, a position it doesn't even hold today. So don't fret, my monolingual friends, you don't have to change a thing. You should, you really should, but you don't have to. Languages are fascinating to learn. Each has a beautiful, nearly never-ending history. Just remember, the next time you're talking with your friends, parents, siblings, co-workers, or pets, I guess, you are creating an art soup that took dozens of millennia to cook up.